Welcome, everyone. I'm Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch. Judicial Watch is a nonpartisan educational foundation that exposes and prosecutes government corruption. We stand for integrity, accountability, and the rule of law in government politics and the law, specifically the judiciary. We're honored to be joined here today for a special presentation by the chairman of the House Government Reform and Oversight Committee, Congressman Jason Chaffetz. Congressman Chaffetz represents Utah's 3rd Congressional District, and as I said, he's chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, and he's also a member of the House Judiciary Committee. The values Chaffetz embraces are reflected in the issues he has prioritized during the course of his service. He ran for office on the promise of returning to the core conservative principles of accountability, strong national defense, limited government, and fiscal discipline. Accountability has been a hallmark of his work. Prior to being named chairman of the Oversight Committee, he played a prominent role in numerous substantial investigations, including the Benghazi terrorist attack, the Fast and Furious gun-running operation, the IRS targeting scandal, and the Secret Service investigation. He's deeply engaged in exposing waste, fraud, and abuse within the federal government. And all those topics are near and dear to Judicial Watch's heart since we've been investigating those as well. And foreign policy and national security are also tied to government corruption, and as a result have been a key focus of his work on both the Oversight Committee and his previous work on the Homeland Security Committee. And I didn't know about this, but, and I'd be interested to learn more about this if you have time, he visited Libya shortly after the Benghazi attack, so his commitment is really personal and significant. And I can tell you, Judicial Watch has to work with lots of congressional committees on the Hill time and again, but the House Government Reform and Oversight Committee, as given the nature of its work, is one of those committees we work with more often than not throughout the years. And it is most members of Congress endeavor to be chairmen of significant committees. I think the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, however significant a role that is within the House, is probably not the first committee many members would want to be heading of, because it results in targeting by administrations and those who are the subject of the investigations. And so if you're the chairman of the committee, you got a target on your back. And so it's a brave role he's stepped into by taking on the chairmanship of the Oversight Committee. He was aggressive in going after Obama administration corruption, and to his credit, unlike some of the Republican establishment in town, he's committed to continuing accountability for corruption from the Obama administration, including the Clinton email scandal. And obviously the next problem that a Republican oversight chairman has with a Republican administration is threading the political needle in conducting oversight of administration in a party controlled by his own. And to Jason Chaffetz's credit, he has highlighted the fact that his committee will continue to be independent and will obviously investigate the government generally, but specifically the Trump administration, and hold the Trump administration to account on standards of ethics and transparency and the rule of law. So we're honored and pleased to be able to present to you Congressman Jason Chaffetz.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. And I really have hats off to you, Tom, specifically, but this organization. I got to tell you, I have sat and watched in awe as Judicial Watch has single-handedly probably done more to expose waste, fraud, and just outright corruption than any other entity that I'm aware of. There are certainly good folks who work in this space, but their tenacious approach and your foresight in understanding that issues take time to percolate and that it would sometimes take years to get to the point where you actually get the documents that you need. Hats off to you. It really, thank goodness that you have done this work. I think the sad reality is that administrations, no matter which side of the aisle they're on, administrations are more fearful of the courts than they are of the Congress. Congress has been somewhat impotent in its ability to actually enforce subpoenas. We have spent years in court trying to clarify certain things, but it shouldn't even have to take the court in order to do this. I think an organization or an administration fully recognizing and appreciating the rule of law, appreciating the separation of powers, should not require you to go to court, and there are inherent conflicts of interest within those, the way it's set up. I have, as the chairman of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, have a unique power, if you will, in that as I can unilaterally issue a subpoena. I can sign a document without having to go to a judge or without having to get a committee vote or something else. The problem is, in order to enforce that subpoena, I need the Department of Justice to do it. And that's a change from a couple hundred years ago, and they did this a little bit differently, and I'll let you go through and look at the history of this. I fundamentally believe that the Congress needs an ability to enforce its own subpoena, rather than relying on an administration who is inherently conflicted from the idea that they don't want to expose documents or compel a person to come testify before Congress. So let's go back and look at the history here for a moment and then go back to this premise and the frustration that I feel. But again, what Judicial Watch and others, but primarily Judicial Watch from a lot of things that I've been keenly interested in, they have been able to go to the courts and get the remedy. And when the court says, yes, you have to provide this, guess what? The administration jumps up and says, oh my goodness, we better hurry up and do that. Not always, but they could move faster, but nevertheless, they do sit up straight and they recognize that, oh my goodness, we actually have to do this. Whereas Congress says we need to do it and they think, nah, we'll get to that later. Which is pretty offensive if you really think about it. I can get a little snarky, but I'll save that for later. So,
You just speak a little bit longer before you.
Yeah. This event's young and it's hang in there with me. The more I talk about it, the more I get
turn
frustrated.
Up the lights.
Yes. The Oversight and Government Reform Committee, under a different name, was founded in 1814. The entire premise of this committee and its founding was that they needed something in Congress, a committee, to oversee all the expenditures. Anything that was spent, any money that flowed out, they wanted to have a committee that could do that. And it was called, in fact, at one point, the Committee on Government Expenditures. It has had a variety of different names. The committee back in the day grew, it expanded, it contracted. At one point, there were 70 members that were on this committee that is now called the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. They reconfigured it. Interestingly enough, audiences, I like to tell them, when Abraham Lincoln came to the United States Congress, it's my understanding, that he was on this committee. That was his committee assignment. And in fact, days into his becoming a member of Congress, young Abraham Lincoln quickly earned a reputation and a name. He was called Spotty because he did not believe the President of the United States about where the Mexican-American War was started. He wanted to know very specifically, tell me, Mr. President, where were these shots fired? And he kept on this in a tenacious, repetitive way, so much so that his colleagues started calling him Spotty. And it's been an inspiration to us, and his photo is the one president that sits in our Oversight and Government Reform Committee, and there's a reason why. Nevertheless, moving forward to the modern day, when I saw this, I got very excited about this because I had these core principles: fiscal discipline, limited government accountability, strong national defense, and I just felt in my heart that if you can get the accountability part of it right, boy, that's going to solve a whole lot of things. And it's core to what the United States Congress is supposed to be doing. Obviously, a representative of the people, it is miraculous to me that you can talk truth to power, that you can actually do these things. And I remember when I was fresh off the plane and went in and I started talking to John Boehner, and I asked for a few pieces of advice, and they were some of the best pieces of advice I got. He said, don't assume somebody else is doing it. Another thing is, he said, you got a really great business card, use it. Everybody will answer your phone. That's not always true, but you do have a business card that can get you indoors and do things. And he said, you can go do whatever you want. Be here a year, and then you'll really understand what you want to do. We started talking about committee assignments, and I was expressing my desire to be on Oversight and Government Reform. showed that passion, and he said, now what about judiciary? And I said, well, I'm not an attorney. And he said, exactly, that's why I need you on the Judiciary Committee. The Judiciary Committee can't be all attorneys. We got to have some people that aren't attorneys. And so I have been on that committee, and I enjoy that committee, and I love that committee. We tackle some of the biggest issues. The pace is never fast enough for me. I'm a go, 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 let's go get after this right now. The pace is, I wish, would be faster. Nevertheless, we did do a number of significant investigations. And let me use one or two of these to sort of highlight the problem and the challenge, and then we collectively, I want to keep talking about this because I actually want to help solve it. I was elected the same time as Barack Obama, right? So I'm taking on my new assignment at the same time the president on day 1 or 2 says, oh, we're going to be the most open and transparent administration, since the dinosaurs walked the planet, is essentially what he was saying. Only to have, I think it was a few weeks later, an attorney clarify that maybe that wasn't going to be quite the case. He went from a presumption of openness and the availability of these documents to be made available to a stiff arm from the White House General Counsel to say, if there are quote-unquote White House equities, we're going to have a look at them before they go anywhere. And we have repetitively bumped into people in the administration who want or think they're going to send something to us only to say, but I got to check with the White House. And then mysteriously this goes away and it turns into a food fight as to whether or not they're going to provide something to us. We have had agency after agency try to hide things using different classifications, made up classifications as a matter of fact, and use every excuse in the book. And it's sad to me, really, if you think about it. Some of the early investigations we were involved with, think of Fast and Furious. We're still in court over Fast and Furious. Fast and Furious was this gun-running scheme where the administration, knowingly and willingly, gave the drug cartels nearly 2,000 weapons. They did this on purpose. Really bad idea. Instead of giving us the documents and showing us the information and coming clean on what they admit was a really bad operation that led to the death of an untold number of people, you had the Attorney General himself personally, and I think and I'm foreshadowing here because we haven't quite released this, almost on a daily basis, personally get involved with exactly what they were going to provide to Congress, not provide Congress, as he personally on a daily basis went out there to try to manipulate the truth and prohibit us, the people, from actually seeing what was going on. Fast forward to what we saw in Benghazi. People have been a little critical of me. Oh, we want you to be just as hard on Donald Trump as you are on Hillary Clinton. Okay, well, if that's the standard, I think that's a good standard. When we heard about what happened in Benghazi and there were 4 dead Americans, it was actually a Utah National Guardsman who came to me, that's a whole other story in itself, came to me and said, I need to speak with you. Met in a SCIF, secure, where you can talk about classified information there in Utah. He told me what his perspective was, having being the senior most military person in Libya up through August of 2012. I came out of that meeting, I thought, all right, I need to go to Libya, which is, my wife, I think, it was not the safest decision I ever made, but she was very good at, and just got on a plane and went and visited with General Ham. And then when you fly into Tripoli, and I spent the better half of a day there in the daylight. I wanted to spend the night, but they wouldn't let me spend the night. So why can't I spend the night? So it's way too dangerous. And I said, well, we got all these other Americans spending the night there. Why can't I spend the night? Oh, it's far too dangerous. And this is not a secure facility. It's our embassy. And when you saw it, and I thought, oh my goodness, why are we still here? Then the lights really start going off. And it was interesting because I was there, like I said, the better half of the day, and then they had to get me out of there. And as we were going through that process, you know what? There was not a single person that entire day that ever talked about a video. Because you know what? That was a lie. They made it up. It was fiction. And yet that was the excuse as to why things happened. And that really was the driving impetus. And then I started to hear the horror stories and meet with the people at the State Department and other agencies that were represented there and see the tears in their eyes and that they weren't allowed to go home and they couldn't talk to their loved ones and they couldn't, you know, they had been through a horrific thing and lost people, colleagues that they worked with, and lived under a threat and danger. And fortunately, the Marines got in there. But when you talk to the Marines and the situation and how they had to take off their uniforms to put on jeans and T-shirts, and the frustration that the leader of the Marines that was there was just fuming mad. I mean, he was mad. And I learned a lot. So then I went back and I started to pepper the administration with the questions of which I already knew the answer because I had firsthand knowledge. They hadn't taken the time to actually go there, but I did. And then I started to ask them these questions, and they were in total denial of all of this. Almost every single fact that I learned there, they denied. And so we asked for documents. We sent a letter, a preservation letter with Hillary Clinton saying, don't destroy, keep all these documents. And we wonder why it took years to go through this. It's because the State Department made this decision. It's the Department of Defense that made this decision. It's the White House that made this decision. Done properly, they should have probably had that in and out of their system in about 3 months' time. So they can complain all they want that I kept going after Hillary Clinton on Benghazi. They made that decision. And I don't think we ever got all the documents. You move forward and look at some of the things we're looking at now. Fast and Furious, good example. Other documents, the Hillary Clinton email. Judicial Watch has been a superstar in extracting documents by using the courts and using FOIA in order to get there. And again, that's the way it should be, but you shouldn't have to go to court to get these types of things, right? There should be a flashing red light that something's wrong if you have to go to court and have the judicial prowess that Judicial Watch has in order to get this. Everyday Americans should be able to go through this process too. But when you see the statistics and you look at the metrics on how often and frequently and the volume in which these things are denied, there's this fundamental mind shift, this mind set that has to change. The government works for the people. And it's the people's government. And so it continues to amaze me how you have administrations and you have people that wake up every day and think, oh, my job is to make sure Congress and the American people don't see this information. I think the one time that I really did lose it, I mean, I really did kind of a little too over the top, was when I started to talk to the legislative liaison from the State Department about Benghazi. And I swore to him, I would, to the end of my days, I will fight him, that he needed to look in the mirror and make a life decision about why in the world does he work for the United States government. Because your job is not to make sure that Congress doesn't get the information. It is not hide the information. We shouldn't have to play whack-a-mole. We shouldn't have to do any of that. And you can take any topic, it's not the way it's supposed to be. Let me go to the Hillary Clinton email investigation. That started because, not some fishing expedition, but because an inspector general, remember there are 72 inspectors general, we have about 13,000 employees working for the government looking under the hood, but the inspector general in the IC community, the intelligence community, came forward and said, we believe there are lots of classified information, bits of classified information in a non-secure setting. That set off the FBI, but it also set off the United States Congress. Only to find out that time after time after time after time after time after time, the State Department, the Secretary of State, etc., tried to rebuff and push us back. And the fact pattern is just the fact pattern. Hillary Clinton repeatedly lied about the disposition of those emails, what they were, what was in there, what was classified, what was not classified. She just repeatedly lied. And that was exposed, and I think the voters ultimately came to that conclusion. It was not because I did something, it's because we helped expose what she was doing and what she wasn't doing. Done properly, she should have just said, yes, this is what they are, and here they are. But again, the courts had to be used. We had to try to issue subpoenas, and we're still not done, ladies and gentlemen. We're still not done. That's her choice, not our choice. That's the choice of now the State Department. Now, a bit of a word, and then I'll shut up here, about the Trump administration. We're not off to a great start, okay? The documentation, subpoenas, and letters still have not been fulfilled. And I buy the idea that there should be some time to get new people in place, but as we turn the corner into April, there's a huge attitude adjustment that's happening in the Oversight Committee, okay? A little bit of patience as a new administration comes on board. The first part of January, the Senate has slowed down some of the Senate, the confirmations, and that's created a hard time to get senior people in the management positions. But I'm tired of waiting. And so I told our staff, as of April 1st, you're going to start seeing us firing off these letters and these subpoenas and getting much more aggressive. And I have foreshadowed this with the White House. I said, don't think now that you're in charge that you get, a 6 or 8 month pass. To the contrary, when we ask you for something, we expect to get it. And if it was a request in the Obama administration, it's still a request now that you're in charge. And this is the Trump administration. We have also, I think you've seen us do a number of things in a bipartisan way. Not all of them will be bipartisan. One of the things we're looking at closely is the General Flynn. You saw us in a joint way ask for documentation from a variety of agencies, including the White House and the Pentagon, about his accepting money from overseas entities, specific countries. You have to, if he was going to do this, he has to actually not only seek permission, but he has to be granted permission from both the State Department and from the Department of Defense. That's the way we read the statute. Not sure what the conclusion of that is, but it doesn't look good for General Flynn at this point. And you've obviously read about that. The point is we will continue the investigations that we had done in the past. We didn't start them because of a political election. They're not going to end because of a political election. I am amazed at the Democrats' newfound commitment to openness, transparency, and principle. It is quite startling to have just less than half of the Congress suddenly wake up and say, this is important. So I applaud them for coming to join us. I thought some of their initial gyrations and flapping in the wind, it was almost comical, the number of letters and things I was getting. Even before Donald Trump was sworn in, they were demanding all these investigations as if he had done something wrong before he had taken office. As it relates to Russia and the campaign, I think we've said many times, and I will say it proactively here because I'm sure I'll get a question about it, the committee that is probably best situated to dive into the sources and methods that will inevitably need to be looked at is the Intel Committee. I do have great faith in Chairman Nunes. I have good faith in the way they can do things. Obviously, that's been in the news over the last 10 days. I can't answer all those questions. You'll have to ask them. We will play a supporting role, and there's still things that we're going to do, like what we're doing with General Flynn and some of the others. But when it comes to sources and methods, that type of thing will be is usually driven first and foremost by the Intel Committee. So, and again, knowing that Judicial Watch is also making a play and using their avenue through the Freedom of Information Act, I cannot thank you enough, cannot applaud Judicial Watch and Tom in particular for their foresight and their aptitude in getting this done. But again, I'm here to tell you, we all need help in looking and pushing an administration and the law so that we don't have to go through these types of gyrations, no matter who's in the White House, no matter who's in the White House. So anyway, with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, but we'll deal with.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sit down here with you.
That's probably
Okay.
best.
All right, good.
Thank you very much. Have you talked to the administration about these transparency issues by now? During the Bush administration, during the Obama administration, they have issued general directives on how to, what their approach to the Freedom of Information Act is. I mean, from my perspective, the president should enforce FOIA the way he's enforcing immigration law. And I think he's someone who would be personally amenable to that. And it's an opportunity to let it all hang out, not only on the Obama administration corruption issues, but also really the Russia issue generally as well. We could probably get a lot more information out through proactive and responsive transparency activities and using the FOIA than frankly through the committee processes.
Yeah,
Did you talk to them about just following FOIA?
Both should be moving full steam ahead, right? There should be a FOIA process where outside entities, individuals, the media can move full steam ahead and access the information in a timely manner. And the timeline we have is short. Now, there was a revamp, if you will. There was an improvement to FOIA. I know that Judicial Watch, and you in particular, wanted us to go even further, but one of the more important things that happened with that is this presumption that they do have to be made available, which was a huge thing, and hopefully will be even more helpful in the courts moving forward. As it relates to congressional inquiries, yeah, I still think there's a huge flushing of the system and an attitude adjustment that needs to be implemented from top to bottom. Now, I have had conversations with everybody from Reince Priebus to Don McGahn, Don being the White House General Counsel, and you know, saying, look, we have these requests. We don't want them to be lost with the transition. This is imperative that we keep this going. We will, if we need to reissue things, we will reissue things, but nobody should say, oh, well, January 20th happened, and then we don't have any obligation to fulfill the previous requests. Some of them legally we have to, like there were subpoenas that we signed right away in the 115th Congress. But things certainly that we've done together, for instance, with Senator Grassley and others, there's no legal case to be made that they should forget about these. And I have very little sympathy on the volume. Typically you'll say, oh, well, we've given you 80,000 documents. Again, let that be noticed that, all right, now they're trying to pull something over here. It's all about percentages, right? I want 100% of the documents, ladies and gentlemen, 100%. And until you get to 100%, we're not done here. So the latest that we had real frustration with is the ATF. They were once sort of in the 115th Congress, one of the first ones that we bumped into, and we'll continue to pursue them. But they got to be moving on both fronts. And when Homeland Security, in another situation, we have Secret Service, and we have the Office of Special Counsel, and they have an important role to get through. You also have inspectors general. By the way, I'm getting off on a little bit of a tangent here. The Department of Justice itself really put the brakes on for about a year, using something that was a little too cute and very frustrating, and that is they stopped giving documents to the inspectors general. And the scheme that they came up with is that it's being reviewed by the Office of Legal Counsel. Office of Legal Counsel is like 20 people, okay, but if that. And they slowed things down knowing that they could try to run out the clock. And Michael Horowitz and others at the Department of Justice, I think, were infuriated by that. Some of that is now happening at the Office of Special Counsel. You have Homeland Security making an argument that personnel records of people that engaged in what appears to be nefarious activities, that they now have attorney-client privilege from other government employees. This is a whole new legal theory that they're diving into that we don't buy in any way, shape, or form, but it appears to be a way to cover up some really embarrassing things that happened at Homeland Security. And they complain about the volume. I said, well, how many people do you have working in Homeland Security? Well, The answer is 250,000. So if you need to repurpose somebody to fulfill your congressional duty, do it. You know, so sorry I gave you a long answer.
Mr. Chairman, I was interested in your comments on bringing back the contempt enforcement power to Congress. And, you know, my understanding is, the history is that included Congress sending out their own law enforcement officers. The last time it happened, a cabinet official was kept in the Capitol jail until his contempt was purged. And that's not an unlawful process. I can imagine why that might be concerning to certain Americans, but as of now, there is no contempt. There is really no teeth to the contempt of Congress charges under for recent administrations, one way or another.
No, look, the example I would use is Brian Pagliano. Okay, forget where you are on the political spectrum. Okay, set aside the words Trump and Clinton. Okay, just set that aside for the argument's sake. We had a duly issued subpoena from the United States Congress compelling Mr. Pagliano to appear before the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That is just the fact pattern. He decided he didn't want to show up. He said that he had shown up at another committee. Different questions, different committee. Quite frankly, I really don't care. I have been given a constitutional duty, responsibility, duly elected by and put forward by the House of Representatives to be the chairman of the Oversight and Government Reform, and per the House rules, I have the subpoena authority to compel his attendance. Now, he may choose to plead the fifth, he may choose to testify. Some people change their minds along the way. That's why you go through this process. Again, think of the other branch of government, the judicial branch. We sent him a duly issued subpoena, and he failed to show up. We sent him another subpoena to show up again, and he failed to show up. So my recourse is what? And this is where I think it's a problem. To send it and make a referral to the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice that's run by Barack Obama, he was the president at the time, on dealing with a topic that relates to his former Secretary of State. There's an inherent conflict of interest. The reality is he has to show up. You don't get the option. Subpoenas are not optional. Imagine if this had happened in the courts and the judge had said, you need to make an appearance. And the person said, nah, I don't think I'm going to do that. What would happen? You'd be in handcuffs. You'd be in jail. There would be all sorts of remedies, but the Congress asked for it. Heaven forbid, that branch of government. Well, we'll think about it. We'll think about it. We went through one case where, in a different setting, dealing with the IRS, I believe was the case, and the D.C., the attorney, for the U.S. attorney for the district, took 10 months to come to the conclusion that they weren't going to do anything. 10 months. It's just fundamentally wrong when there's an inherent conflict of interest, and B, they don't enforce it. And so that's something that we are going to draw more attention to, and I hope here today it helps get more attention, because if you have a duly issued subpoena, you have to show up. And if you want to plead the fifth, that's your constitutional right, and we respect that, but you still have to show up.
And the conflict isn't necessarily a political one, it's an institutional one. The Department of Justice is often being asked to enforce contempt citations against agency officials. Would it require a change in the rules of the House and the way they just proceeded with the investigations, or would they have to get a statutory change as well?
The House of Representatives needs to have some guts. They lack guts, and the administration knows it, and they thumb their nose, they don't care.
So you could just change the rule. The House can do it without
The House can
law.
do it unilaterally.
Right.
And
it's still
they've
subject-
done it. They did it in the past.
And you're still subject to court process, so, so it's not a star
There'll
chamber.
still be a process, but yeah, they just lack the guts. That's what I think they lack more than anything.
Well, I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience or comments. But if you have anything to get off your chest, I prefer you not raise your hand. But if you have a question that's specific, I'd appreciate it. Yes, Neil.
Hey, Mr. Chairman,
If you're with the media, could you identify yourself?
I'm sorry, this is Neil McCabe with Breitbart.
Yeah.
When the American Health Care Act was created through private working groups, it wasn't done through committees that were in public hearings. Congress is exempt from FOIA. Is there any way of finding out who the industry representatives or other people who are involved in crafting the American Health Care Act?
Well, you are, you are correct that the administration is the one that's subject to Freedom of Information Act. Congress, or the legislative branch, as well as the judicial branch, do have different rules in how they make their own sausage, if you will. But once the government expenditure is happening and there are taxpayers' dollars going out in enforcing law and implementing policy, that has been a different equation, and I think it probably will continue to be.
Don't you think there could be, at least the administrative functions of the House could be open to transparency laws? Without getting into what individual offices are doing, which might raise some separation of powers.
Yeah, there
concerns.
are some separation of powers issues that are going to be interesting. I think that, my own personal opinion, I think the Aaron Schock case is going to kind of test that. Again, I'm not an attorney; I just play one on TV. But
You and me both.
but I think the idea that you had somebody wearing a wiretap who was a congressional employee walking in to discussions that a member of Congress was having is a really interesting separation of powers case. Maybe somebody looks at it and says, no, that's up and down, black and white. But I think, and you've seen this happen in the past, not directly like that, but that's a really interesting phenomenon if you're actually bugging a person or wiring a member of Congress's office of somebody who has not been charged. What are the restraints? What are the obligations that they have? That'll be a really interesting case. So.
No, you're not talking about what President Obama did to Senator Sessions because he was tied to the Trump campaign and they were
No, I was
investigating
talking
him.
about Aaron Schock.
No.
Yeah,
Okay, just to be clear.
just to be clear.
Yes, no question. Yes.
Hey, Darren Samuelson from Politico.
Yeah.
Chairman Chaffetz, can you just clarify a little bit? You said the Trump administration was not off to a great start, and that you had some documents that were not fulfilled. What are you specifically referring to? And
Well-
then you also mentioned you told your staff on April 1 that they'd start firing off letters and subpoenas. What
Yeah, look,
specifically are you talking about there?
We had presented to Don McGahn before the president had been sworn in, while he was not a government employee, but we had still summarized the letters. It's nothing private. They've been out there in the public domain. We just summarized them and said we expect these to be fulfilled. But you're still dealing with the same administrative personnel by and large, the non-political appointees who were giving us the stiff arm in the past, and they're giving us the stiff arm now. And I don't think they're off to a good start in changing that equation. We're getting the same result that we got before January 20th. So I hope that we're just chalking that up to, well, we haven't put in our senior most management yet, but this can't wait for 6 months. This is something that has to change immediately. It was a big reason why I think the country was excited that there was a new president, that there was going to be a fundamental shift here. Then again, remember where Barack Obama as the new president was. Everything's going to be, again, the most open and transparent administration ever. And turned out to be one of the worst administrations in terms of openness and transparency that we've ever seen, particularly in the electronic age, when these things should be easier, not more difficult. And it's just stunning, the creativity and reluctance to provide basic documents. And so I just haven't seen anything change in the first 70 some odd days. I would hope that the president would get much more aggressive and demand that these departments and agencies provide the documents that Congress is seeking.
We've had several court hearings related specifically to the Clinton email issue during the Trump administration, and the lawyers have come in with the same legal positions they had during the Obama administration. not only defending the stonewalling and seeking more and more time and the typical exemptions, but also defending the conduct of Mrs. Clinton. So,
Yeah, I mean, you
I
can,
guess
you
we're
can
cor-
pick almost any department and agency, we're still having the same problems. It's not just the State Department. Well, not much time has gone by. Not much time has gone. I have been impressed in when we asked, for instance, of the GSA contract, that was disposed of right on time. So in that respect, that was new. The few requests there are a few requests in the Trump administration that have come in on time. But that is but a very small percentage of what I've asked for. Yes, Trump Hotel. The back and forth that we had in the timelines we laid out were, I believe, all fulfilled. I don't think there was anything that, it may have spilled a day or two, but it really wasn't as egregious as some of these others were.
yes, sir, in front here. 1 second for the microphone.
I'm Bill Murphy from the New England Institute of Technology. In 1978, the Senate adopted a statute that allowed the Senate Legal Counsel to file directly in federal court a complaint for people who did not comply with subpoenas. In a quirk of the process, the House there was legislation for the House in the same package.
Right.
The relevant House committees didn't review it, and it wasn't adopted. My question to you is, what do you think the climate is like now if someone were to bring forward that solution? Because it would solve a lot of the problems that you're saying. You can go directly to court. You don't have to go through the Justice Department, and the court could then it would convert to a contempt of court, and then the court could enforce it through its customary sanctions.
Something has to change, and I just think the House in particular has been a bunch of wimps. That's just, I don't know how else to more bluntly say it.
Even with something like this, though, you mean it?
Yeah, look, there are some of us that live and breathe this every day. There are others in management that don't want to rock the boat on this stuff, and it's terribly frustrating. And as I turn the corner into year 3 of doing this, I do plan to get much more aggressive in trying to fundamentally change the way this works.
You know, I remember raising this with another leader in the House a few years ago, and talked about the contempt powers of the House and how they can be enforced by the House itself, and the response, well, are you crazy? We'd have to hire thousands of police officers. Well, I think there are already thousands of police officers working on the Capitol grounds. They do a great job, but there's 10,000
We
police
just need
officers.
one or two really
That's
good ones,
right.
that's all. And look, if the administration understood that we actually had the firepower to do what we said, it would fundamentally change the equation.
What would really change, too, is when people are asking their lawyers, what will happen if we don't comply? The answer now is really nothing. If they say, well, you know, you're
Well,
could
I will
get
say,
fined.
well, look.
Or not nothing, I'm sorry. But
Well, here's what there is a differentiation. When we issue a subpoena and make an issue with somebody outside of government, we get a near instantaneous response. That's as much about the power of the media as it is the ability to enforce the subpoena. Nobody wants to be on the receiving end of the wrath and the media presence that we can put on a company. Think about the pharmaceutical companies that we've been holding accountable on the pricing issues. We've gotten some very rapid response, and most responsible organizations do not want to do that, respond. But then if you look at people within the administration, and the worst actors are the State Department and the Department of Defense, they kind of say, yeah, do whatever you want. Yeah, the federal officials. That's where they just think they can play a waiting game and use delay tactics.
the answer to them needs to be,
Yeah.
you'll get fined,
Yeah.
certainly, and possibly.
Yeah. Look, and we also did pass, it's a very important piece of legislation, the IG, the Inspector General Empowerment Act. It gave them more authority and more ability. And the other thing we're trying to do, a big part of what Oversight's going to do, is civil service reform. We did do the Whistleblower Protection Act for the FBI. That is helpful in this regard. But inspectors general need to be able to get this information, and right at the top of our list is we have to fight back against Homeland Security and their new legal theory that they don't have to allow the Office of Special Counsel the documents that Inspector General can get. I mean, it seems crazy, right? They'll give them to the Inspector General, but they won't give them to the Office of Special Counsel. That's not right.
You had a hearing last week. I was honored to testify at it on behalf of Judicial Watch, but I think this is an important issue, despite the fact everyone talks about other issues here. But
Right.
our government has $5 trillion in taxpayer liability related
Yeah.
to mortgages
Yeah.
through these two government-controlled agencies, Fannie and Freddie. We fought in court on transparency issues there, and you've got an interesting piece of legislation.
It's really a simple piece of legislation that I introduced. It requires Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to be subject to a Freedom of Information Act request. They claim to be in this quasi-government category, so they think they're exempt from it. But the bottom line is the simplicity, the which I look at it, the taxpayers are on the hook. If Fannie and Freddie fail, there's some $5 trillion in mortgages that they have. And there's like, I can't remember how big the number is. It's like 400 billion. I'd have to check that. I'm not 100% certain. That would be the most direct hit to the taxpayers. But even if it's $100, the idea that they had to be taken over and are now part of the federal government, and the FHFA has jurisdiction over them, and we read this nice legal statement that defines this. Why aren't they subject to a Freedom of Information Act request? Amtrak, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. I mean, Eleanor Holmes Norton wants to do it on the Smithsonian. Seems good to me. I mean, if they're going to take federal dollars, guess what, folks? The people have a right to know what they're spending their money on and what the liability is. So these quasi-government entities are certainly in our sights, and I started, I think, with the biggest liability for the United States of America, which is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And there's more salacious things going on there, and I did use the right word, salacious. You'll hear more about that later. Yeah.
We have time for maybe one more question or comment. Yes, in the back. Wait for the microphone.
And then I have to get on a train, so I wish I could stay and chat with you, but I need to head north. So
I have a quick question regarding President Trump's travel to Palm Beach. Is there any official guidelines regarding presidential travels? And also the security concerns, I think both of you
I
can
will
answer
tell
it.
you, yeah, it's a good question. We are concerned. The president at a moment's notice does need to be able to respond to a world crisis at any moment. The Secret Service, I have a great deal more comfortable. I feel much more comfortable between our military, the Secret Service, the communications team at the White House. They gave us a bipartisan. By the way, I brought the Democrats with us when we went down to the White House this week. Glad to not take an article on that. About giving us a briefing about Mar-a-Lago specifically. How do they secure it? What do they do to secure it? Was the president looking at classified information when you saw the pictures of the Japanese prime minister and him, at dinner in an open setting, and people are pasting up on Facebook? It looked really odd, and we did approach that. We did get a briefing, and I'd feel much more comfortable about that. And look, anytime the president's outside of the White House, he has to be able to be in a secure setting virtually immediately. And so that creates all kinds of logistical issues, but we spend billions of dollars to make sure that the president and the vice president can do that at a moment's notice, no matter where they are in the world. I think you will see the president spending time in other places on the weekends. I think it's good for the president, personally. I think it's good to get out and breathe real air but no matter where he goes or what he decides to do, he has a rather large security component that will have to travel with him, and that's expensive. And it's not a Donald Trump only phenomenon. That happens with President Obama, and it still happens with all the former presidents. While they don't have the SCIF requirements, they do have the security requirements. And it's what we do to make sure that nothing ever happens. But the government does spend quite a bit of money. I will tell you the other thing that's perhaps different about Donald Trump is the fact that his primary residence outside of the White House, his personal home residence, is that Trump Tower, and certainly guarding and securing in downtown Manhattan is rather expensive, rather than, say, Joe Biden, who's out, in Delaware in a rural setting. So it is more expensive in that setting.
Yeah, I think the trick is to try to separate the hatred for Donald Trump that usually is engendered in discussions about his travel with, I think, more sensible discussions about how much is the cost of the presidency? How much does it cost? Can we get some savings? And we've been highlighting the cost of presidential travel during the Obama administration. We're still waiting for the cost of presidential travel during the Trump administration, but we've been tracking it. And, I think the president would do well to focus more on just how much Air Force One costs. Is those contracts necessary? And as you've pointed out, you've been a leader in the reform of the Secret Service. The Secret Service is a bit of a mess, and it's a serious issue that requires not only a cost analysis, but a systematic analysis about how well it's working.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add as we finish
No,
up?
listen, again, thanks for being here, and thanks for caring about these issues. I believe in my heart of hearts and deep in my soul, and so it's an honor and privilege to serve in this capacity, and I thank you for what you're doing at Judicial Watch, and I thank you all for being interested in what I believe is a very, very important topic, so thank you.
Well, I appreciate your leadership on this issue, Mr. Chairman, and if you can convey this to your colleagues, from Judicial Watch's perspective, we have hundreds of thousands of supporters, Republican, Democrat, Independent, who thirst for leadership on these corruption issues. They don't think Congress should be doing anything else other than the type of work you're doing. And it's a winner both substantially and politically, and as you know, both sides of the aisle are interested in this. We go and testify on the Hill, and Democrats and Republicans are on our side on transparency. They fight over specifics on the politics, but it's a winner. And if Congress would do well to focus more on reform and anti-corruption work, and so we appreciate any work you're able to do there to advance the ball there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. That was great. Really good. That's great. Good. And I wish I could stay in jail.